The South African economy is stuck in first gear. Slow economic growth, high levels of unemployment, and high inflation is likely to continue for some time. That is the Shadow Minister for Finance, Dion George's gloomy forecast for South Africa. That said, inflation figures released today were on target, down to 5.9% from a previous 6.4%. In order to discuss South Africa's outlook in more depth, I am joined by Busisiwe Radebe from Nedbank Johannesburg. Thank you for joining us. What does the lower inflation rate mean for South Africa's economy?
If you look at the number, it came down to 5.9. I think the market was expecting 6.1% there. But the downside was a bit of a surprise. I think we all knew that the petrol price was going to come down quite a bit. It came down on a monthly basis 4.8%. Everyone had that in. But I think food prices, we know the trajectory was more or less down, came down more dramatically than what we actually expected there. You need to look, if you want to think about an interest rate trajectory and how this is going to influence what's going to happen interest rate-wise in the future, you need to actually look at it now and say, what does this mean for inflation actually going ahead? If we want to look ahead, we think the softer inflation will actually still come through for the next couple of months. So we might have a situation where inflation is going to be below 6% for the next couple of months before we see the impact of a weaker rand actually come through. Because one, we know that oil prices have come down to below $90 a barrel, so we're going to see that come through in the petrol price, and that's actually going to bring that inflation number down. But we've also seen that global food prices have come down quite a bit, so we're going to see that come through in that number. So that number might be below the Reserve Bank 6% upper target range, and then later on, only will we probably start seeing that impact of the rand. But if you recall previously, that impact has actually taken, that rand impact has actually taken quite a long time to actually show through. So we are seeing soft inflation. What does this mean for interest rates? Well, we had initially penciled in a 25 basis point interest rate hike in November. But obviously with this number coming through and surprising to the downside, the probability of that hike has probably just declined a bit there. But I think it still will depend on what is actually going to go on with the rand and just looking at monetary policy globally. But so far, that 25 basis points that we've had, the probability of it for November has actually just decreased slightly.
Do you think the South African government's prediction of 3.2% real GDP growth in 2015 is an accurate one?
You have to feel for what National Treasury has to do because, with any economist, you've got a couple of times a year to actually change your growth forecast. I think every time we get a new GDP number, which is quarterly, you can actually go look at your number and say, is this still in line? National Treasury gets to do this twice a year. They get to do it in the budget in February, and they get to do it again today, actually, at the medium-term budget policy statement in October. So they've got 2 times a year to get this thing right. And most of the time it looks more or less okayish, but they couldn't have predicted that we were going to have that longer strike this year. So instead of looking at that 2015 number, because they are obviously going to give us new numbers today, this afternoon, instead of looking at that number, you want to look at the 2014 number, because that's where their base is. The 2014 number, what they expected in February was that growth this year was going to be 2.7%. But as you've read and as you've seen, the IMF has come up with a downgrade of our growth there. Even the Reserve Bank has a downgrade of our growth. So even Nedbank, we think we're going to grow this year in 2014 at about 1.4, 1.5%. And the Reserve Bank has the same idea of growth that we're going to grow at about that rate, but they have said that there might be downside risks even to that number. So today what we want to see the minister do is to actually just come up with a new 2014 number. The 2.7% that they had for 2014 obviously is not going to come to fruition, so they're going to come up with a lower number for 2014. And then the numbers obviously will be lower for 2015 and 2016. So it depends on the base they had this year. So it's going to be a lower number than that 3.2%, most probably because obviously the base this year they're going to have to change the 2.7% they've had. It's not at the time when they did these forecasts and they released it in February. Maybe that was the general mood, but we didn't know that the strike was going to carry on that long that we've had, and they're going to have to tweak the numbers.
With the medium-term budget policy statement released today, what do you think should be done to help the South African economy?
There are quite a few things that could be done to help the economy. There are quite a few things you want to see the minister actually discuss this afternoon. There's a difference between the medium-term budget, what they call, probably you can call it a mini-budget, and the budget that comes out in February. The February budget, you sort of get the big announcements. So people are trying to February is those big announcements that we get through, big changes. The mini-budget that you get in October is sort of an update of revenues so far, expenditure so far, and just sort of a taste probably of what is going to actually come out in the budget in February. So perhaps in this particular budget, they're going to talk about taxes, obviously, tax revenues, and sort of the Davis Tax Commission that has come through. They're going to sort of maybe, not say much there, but maybe have a block in the sort of budget review to say more or less what they're kind of looking at. And then the one thing they're going to actually bring through here is some sort of, they have to discuss it now because credit rating agencies are looking at it, but some sort of help for Eskom. I think that's a big thing that's going to come through there. So they're going to sort of fix the growth forecast and tell us I think they're going to probably downgrade those growth forecasts. But the most important thing here would be an important announcement that would come up is what is going to happen, what kind of help is Eskom going to get. I think that will actually, credit rating agencies will look at that and say, oh, government is probably serious about this electricity constraint that we have in the economy, and that could sort of bolster sort of the view that outside investors have of South Africa. So that's a big thing that we're looking for this afternoon, that we actually say government is actually doing something about the electricity situation. And I think that is sort of low-hanging fruit at the moment, something that needs to actually be done, and to show credit rating agencies as they're going to come out, especially I think it's Moody's that still has to sort of make some sort of a credit rating change or come up with an update. And I think probably people have been waiting for this medium-term budget, and I think the Eskom thing will be an important one to have a look out for.
That's it from South Africa for today. Dukas copy reports from around the globe, so make sure you keep up with us. Goodbye.